Burke Strunsky is a hard-charging man, ex-member in good standing of the San Francisco DA's office, now senior deputy DA in Riverside. That takes skill, persuasive powers. Strunsky would need them in the murder case against the former police chief and family man, Chris Hall.
Mr. Hall, on the surface, looks like a loving family man. He looks like a good father. He was somebody that had the support of his family.
So he did. But Strunsky wasn't buying the loving father and family man bit. No, when he heard about Chris Hall's very obvious grief, the wailing that went on after the so-called accident, the phrase that crossed his mind was, "It's an act."
I think it was a wonderful performance by the defendant of acting like a bereaved husband. But when you look at his actions, how little he did to help his wife.
Who tried harder to save Christy? Not Chris, said the prosecutor, but his daughter.
She called 911. She helped him get the body out of the spa. She is the only one that did chest compression. He had no interest in truly helping his wife.
A matter of opinion, of course. But Prosecutor Strunsky poked around in Chris Hall's past as a policeman. And what did he find?
This man had an uncanny ability to fabricate stories.
7 years earlier, while Hall was chief of police in Cascade, Idaho, he was charged with and convicted of misuse of public money, embezzled $19,000, spent 10 months in jail. A white-collar crime, hardly murder. But what struck the prosecutor is that he says Hall tried to cover it up, to plan a fraud, to lie about it, not just lie about it, but lie about it effectively.
I think that was very telling about who we were dealing with.
Suddenly, the prosecutor's prospects were looking better. At the trial, Strunsky made Lindsay Patterson his star witness. Of course, it was her story, after all, that got the whole thing started. But almost as important, he called the Riverside County medical examiner, who testified that those lacerations on Christie's head could not, in his opinion, have been the result of a single accidental fall. And the ME argued the particular type of bruising on Christie's face and body was a hallmark of homicide.
The totality of injuries were not consistent with somebody slipping and falling and then a rescue attempt.
And there was a clump of hair in the bottom of the spa, still entwined with a broken plastic hair clip. That, said the prosecutor, could only have come from a violent struggle.
When you lose that amount of hair, it's not reasonably explained by any kind of fall.
There were some minor hiccups in the case. Lindsay Patterson, for example, was a little inconsistent about how long she looked over the backyard wall that first time she saw something going on. Was it just a few seconds or as long as a minute? But either way, said the prosecutor, Lindsay was sure she saw physical contact. That was the important thing.
He was given the opportunity to explain any physical contact that could in any way reasonably explain what Lindsay Patterson missaw. In other words, were they washing each other? Were they involved in a sex act? Was there anything that she could have misinterpreted? And at the end of the day, you're not just stuck with the fact that Lindsay Patterson made a mistake. You have to actually believe that Lindsay Patterson really hallucinated about everything she saw.
And what made Lindsay's story all the more convincing, said Prosecutor Strunsky, was she told it before finding out what happened to Christy. She dialed 911 a full minute and a half before anyone from the Hall house did, before Lindsay had any idea how it would end. Hidden violence is what Strunsky called it, and then killed his spouse when he thought nobody was looking.
Chris Hall ambushed his wife, grabbed her by the hair, slammed her head twice into the concrete edge. He's holding his wife of almost 3 decades under the water, showing absolutely no mercy and no remorse and an absolute desire to end her life at that point.
And then the pièce de résistance.
He then gets out of the spa, walks into the house where his plan is to wake his 22-year-old daughter, who he can use as a alibi witness.
One little quibble. Why? In fact, as convinced as he was of Hall's guilt, Strunsky conceded the why was a problem. Didn't legally have to know, he said, but he just didn't. There it was.
It's emotionally unsatisfying not to have that answer, not to know the entire narrative of what happened.
But you'd want to know why this guy, married to this woman for almost 30 years, apparently happily, would suddenly turn on her and drown her in the pool.
Right, and I'm not sure we got the answers to that specific question.
Kind of an important question, isn't it?
It's an important question, and a question that we ask in all spousal homicides.
So, proof enough? Or reasonable doubt? But the highlight was the Hall daughter's testimony. Emotional, quite powerful. So it put Prosecutor Strunsky in a strange position, at odds with the victim's own family. They were so clear. If we had any inkling he had done this, believe me, we would have said so. And we would have seen it.
And I think that's what they truly believe in their hearts. And, you know, it weighs on me greatly, but my job is to get justice for Christy Hall.
Now it was up to a jury to decide. After 6 days of testimony, 2 days of deliberation, they couldn't. It was a deadlock. The judge declared a mistrial. Chris Hall walked out of court with his family, free, but not quite in the clear, and nothing at all like a victory for the Hall daughters. What was it like to get that hung jury? What did you think then?
That was tragic. That was devastating to us.
You expected a not guilty verdict?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Not a doubt.
Deputy DA Burke Strunsky was disappointed too, and was also determined to retry the case. But first, he sent his investigator on a mission to explore the life and marriage of Chris Hall. Prosecutor Strunsky needed to explain what Lindsay Patterson saw or didn't see. Why didn't she see Christy's drowned body when she peeked over the wall a second time?
We were not able to explain to the jury why she didn't see Christy at that point. And I think that allowed the defense to make the argument that Christy Hall was inside.
The prosecution hired a water expert to do a recreation at the Hall Spa. Andrea Zafaris has been assisting law enforcement nationwide with drowning investigations for the past 20 years. Zafaris got in the spa while Strunsky videotaped from the spot where Lindsay was watching.
From the center of the pool and towards where Lindsay was standing, anywhere I was laying, you could not be seen from Lindsay's viewpoint. So once I sank below the surface and hit that bottom, you could not see me at all from Lindsay's viewpoint.
And now the prosecutor was ready. In May 2011, 1 year after the first jury deadlocked, Burke Strunsky went back to court armed with his new evidence for a brand new panel of Hall's peers. And in the end, it was very quick. Guilty of first-degree murder. You can still hear those daughters accusing you of unfairly convicting their father.
Absolutely. It weighs on me, but at the same time, I know who I'm dealing with when it comes to Chris Hall. In fact, he's the one that's stolen their mother from them.
It had been a peculiar fact of this case that the victims' and defendants' families had stood solidly together against the prosecution.
Thank you so much for coming.
And when it was over, Hall convicted and sentenced to 25 years to life. Some of Christie's relatives met with Prosecutor Strunsky and thanked him.
They wanted me to thank you for putting that guy away, because he's a murderer.